This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Tara Swart. Dr. Tara Swart. She's a neuroscientist, leadership coach, award-winning author. And today she brings up one of those subjects that's going to cause some people to go yes, and some people to be a little skeptical. Of course, since she's on my podcast, I'm one of those people saying yes. Our topic today, her newest book, The Source. She dives into, from a neuroscience perspective, digging into the nitty-gritty, the science that supports the law of attraction. Today, you can go on Amazon and you can find everything under the sun. You can go on Medium and find everything under the sun. Those books, those ideas, those authors that say, here's the magic formula. But what Tara goes into is that all of this is in our mind. It's the system in our mind that controls it all. Change that system, tweak that system. Everything else changes. Bottom line, can you reshape your mind and reshape your destiny? Absolutely, 100%. If you disagree with that, what are you doing listening? If you disagree with that, you're done, you're over. Just lay there and wait for the end. I really enjoy these conversations where I can get into that life-changing philosophical way. And Tara brings that. Let's jump right into my conversation with Tara Swart and understand the science behind the law of attraction. So I'm thinking about this guy, Roger Bannister, the first sub 4-minute mile, 1954. In 2006, there was this film book that Oprah really loved called The Secret. Now, these things actually connect in a way because, and I'm going to let you fill in the blanks here, but the interesting thing about Bannister in that 4-minute mile, obviously he was the first, but then after him, many other people quickly came on board. So why don't you walk through Bannister and then let's bring The Secret in as well, because I think a lot of people hear The Secret and they think, oh my gosh, where is this going? Let's keep it at Bannister for a moment.
I love the way that you've put those two things together, because I think the Roger Bannister example is quite an old example, obviously, from sports psychology, which is really backed up now by the neuroscience. I think people would already be thinking, how does that go with The Secret? So let's see if we can get there. Roger Bannister was the first man to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. Prior to him achieving that, it was thought by the world, by sports psychologists, doctors, physiologists, that it was humanly impossible to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. As soon as he did it, obviously there was a lot of focus on his achievement. I think what doesn't get noticed or remembered as much is that shortly after that, within 2 or 3 months, several other people ran a mile in less than 4 minutes. From the neuroscience point of view, what that tells us is that the difference between thinking something is impossible and then knowing that it is possible can actually change what you can physically achieve. So it starts to really open up what I consider the wonder of the mind-body connection, or the power of the mind over the body.
Who disagrees with you at this stage for the Bannister example? It's plain as day. It happened. That's true.
I don't think anybody disagrees with that example, but I think once you start saying the brain-body connection, there are people that don't really get that. So it's not really that they disagree, but they perhaps haven't thought about it or don't realize how sort of dynamic it is in both directions, or just undervalue it. Then when you move to the power of the mind over the body, you're losing more people. I think when you get to really the statement that's associated with The Secret, which I've included in my book, which is the way we think determines our life, then you've got a smaller group of people who are still on that journey, if you see what I mean.
The way we think, how can it not be how our life unfolds? I mean, I'm asking you for the criticism right out of the gate because it seems so basic, like what we think becomes what we do, becomes our life. It seems so basic to me. I mean, I'm already on your side to some degree, so I'm still curious about how people don't see that. What's the block? What's the controversy?
I can tell you in real time the feedback that I've had since my book's been out in the UK since February, which is that I would say 95% of people are like, this is amazing, this is great, I'm going to do all the exercises, especially because it's backed up by science. But there is that small number of people that will say, well, she hasn't talked about the fact that luck plays a part in this. She hasn't talked about the fact that some people have access to a great education and therefore their life is much easier. It's a difficult one because I don't want to go down the road of The Secret, which errs towards saying that if bad things happen to you, then that's also created by what you've thought. I don't particularly want to echo that message. And I do want to say you make your own luck, but I don't want to say if you feel you've been unlucky, then perhaps it's that you're not taking responsibility for the way that you think. Some of these exercises, for example, an ancient Buddhist philosophy that's backed up very much by cutting edge neuroscience is replace every negative thought with a positive thought. Now, that actually takes some effort. I think that's where it gets kind of like, well, are you lucky or have you actually been working really hard behind the scenes and that's not necessarily visible? I always think it's similar to a pop music star who's described as being an overnight success. There isn't a single music star who's been described that way that would describe their own journey as an overnight success. I think it's the same with anything that you set your mind to that's pivotal to your life in terms of changing your behavior and the way you think to make that happen.
I think what happens too with some of the critics is they get this fantasy in their mind where everything is a straight line. If you go down the path of the law of attraction, it doesn't necessarily equate to a straight line. There's going to be ups and downs, valleys, pits, highs, lows. That's okay, but you can absolutely control the direction. It doesn't mean perfection of everything one might want, but you can control the direction. I mean, to say otherwise is like just to sit on the couch and waste away.
You've put that so beautifully. I'm actually going to use what you've just said in my future talks. Absolutely. I know there are so many ups and downs, so many low periods, including ones that feel like they're going to last forever. All you can do is draw on your determination, your resilience, and positive thinking to traverse those sort of difficult periods. Absolutely, in terms of what you say about it's like sitting on the couch and letting it happen, is even where I talk about things like vision boards, I actually call them action boards because I say it's not about creating imagery for your perfect life and then sitting on the couch and waiting for the checks to roll in. It's about doing something every day to make that happen. I think part of the issue is, this has become really live for me, is that people don't like to display vulnerability. So they don't like to talk about the difficult times. They like to focus on the positive times, which has its good aspects. What this book has made me do is actually be much more open about the times where I felt like giving up, where things were going really badly for me, to demonstrate, in fact, that whatever success is surrounding the book or my career now, that it absolutely has not always been that way. And it's not just once that it was not going that way, it's several times. One of the things I actually write about is that motivation to keep picking yourself up when it looks like things are absolutely not going your way.
I'm going to dig in and flesh through a lot of the detail that you lay out. But I want to keep it at The Secret for a moment because this was quite the phenomenon when it happened. And I remember watching the original video and I remember thinking, well, gosh, who's going to disagree with this? This makes perfect sense to me. This is basically how I've lived my life to some degree without knowing about the, quote, law of attraction, without having any understanding of it. It just made perfect sense to me. But it was quite controversial. It was quite controversial and commercial. A lot of videos sold, a lot of books sold. What was the negative there? Because I want you to outline what the law of attraction is, but I want you to go ahead and put it into context with The Secret, because most people, if they hear about the, quote, law of attraction, they're going to go right back to The Secret. If they have a negative view or if they think they knew what it was, they're going to slot it alongside The Secret.
Totally true. And I went on a journey with this myself because when I first started wanting to write in this area, I did the research about what are the laws of attraction. I would say that very simply, it's about your thoughts attracting things in the real world. So it's about the nature of your thoughts, and what you think about creates real world outcomes. If you dig deeper into what actually are the 12 laws, there isn't huge consensus about what they are. There are definite commonalities, but if you look at different areas, then you can see some differences. Trying to distill it down to the 12 that there was most agreement around. The area of distinction is that The Secret used quantum physics to explain these laws of attraction. The main criticism was that if it's to do with how you think, then shouldn't it be a cognitive science like psychology or neuroscience that explains how it works? When you use quantum physics and you talk about a field of atoms and vibrations resonating with your thoughts, that leaves you very open to criticism. Now that we have sophisticated scanning techniques and we can look at MRI and functional MRI, which is magnetic resonance imaging, and diffusion tensor imaging that shows the direction of flow of information around the brain, and other similarly amazing and insightful techniques, we can actually use the science of the brain and the science of how we think to go back and explain those same principles about how does the way you think affect the way you live and therefore affect what happens to you in the real world.
Did I hear you say flow? Was that flow state that you said in the middle of that comment?
These are the words that get used: flow, vibration, resonance, field energy, quantum physics. Some of them, like flow, I think has really positive connotations and people get what that means and it's explained by positive psychology. Some of those words, it's very easy to criticize and say, well, that's either not an empirical science, which means it's not based on data, or it's not the relevant science to explain our thinking.
Let's see if I can get the name right. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi? Close, right?
I'm not going to try to compete with you on that.
But he's the flow guy.
Yeah.
You were talking about the imaging. So let's keep it there for a second. So we're talking about the law of attraction. We're talking about the power of the mind. Take it too, because look, you've got some serious educational background. We're not talking, this is not just kind of a whimsy conversation about the law of attraction. You've done the deep dive. What happens when we start to look at the brain imaging when people get to certain states, when they feel certain things, when they think certain things? What are we seeing with some of the brain behavior? Now, that's a big open-ended question. You can go in a lot of different directions. Whet my appetite some.
Okay, I think it's really important to say that there's actually research that shows if you put a picture of a brain scan next to a statement, that people are more likely to believe it. Well, maybe because I'm a neuroscientist with a PhD and I'm a medical doctor, I don't want to overplay what we can understand from scanning techniques. I sometimes say it's a little bit like if you had a photograph of me and you said, I know everything about her and her personality. We need to be careful how much we extrapolate from even the current most sophisticated scanning techniques. We do know a lot more about what happens when we experience certain emotions, everything from where this plays out in the brain to how much activity correlates with different types of emotions and the effect that that has, the cascade effect on the rest of the brain, for example, on our decision making or our risk appetite. We also know that if someone's in a coma and you ask them to imagine playing tennis, that we see activity in the parts of the brain that would be active if you were actually physically playing tennis. So this brings us very much back to your opening question about...
Whoa. Take that one back a second.
Yeah.
I want to wrap my arms around what you just said. Someone's in a coma?
Yeah.
Play that again for me. I just want to make sure I really hear that clearly.
Yeah, there are so many examples. I think I could tell you things that you'll be like, whoa, let's go back and talk about that. One is that if someone's in a coma, you say to that person, imagine that you're playing tennis, and they're able to do that, obviously, then we can see activity in the parts of the brain that are not just to do with imagination, they're to do with physically playing tennis. So they're to do with moving your arms and legs, they're to do with hand-eye coordination. I can go further. There's a study which I've written about in the book about lifting weights. It's actually looking at discrete muscle groups in fingers and arms and showing, and I can't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but they're in the book, about people who actually lifted weights compared to people who imagined lifting weights. Now, this isn't an excuse to not do any exercise. The percentage increase in mass of muscles for people that lifted weights was obviously significant. It was 30-something%. The percentage increase in muscle mass for people who only imagined lifting weights was, I think it was about 12 or 13%. I mean, it was not zero. It was not the same as actually lifting the weights.
Hold on. You're saying that people like literally just milling around the house, not lifting weights, but actually thinking about doing the activity increase their muscle mass?
Yeah. They weren't milling around the house. It was a controlled study. So it was,
Okay.
But yes, there was a control group, a group that actually physically lifted weights with their finger or their arm, and then people who just imagined lifting the weights. That third group actually had an increase in muscle mass, not as much as the group who were lifting weights, but significantly more than the control group.
How long have we been saying mind over matter?
I know. That's something that some people believe and some people won't, because there hasn't been the evidence for it. Can I tell you about my favorite study in this route?
Yes, of course.
When I was a junior doctor, I did a lot of care of the elderly. I just adored my grandparents. Anything to do with older people, I find really sort of inspiring, but also just really heartwarming. Ellen Langer at Harvard, she talks about this experiment. Unfortunately, it's quite an old experiment, so it wasn't done as a proper clinical trial, but it was repeated by the BBC in a show called The Young Ones. And it involved 3 groups of people in their 80s. One group were the control group, so they lived normal for a week. One group were moved to homes that looked like the homes the people lived in 20 years prior, so when they were in their 60s. Any visual aids or mobility aids that they weren't using 20 years ago were taken away from them for a week. They had photos in the house of themselves when they were younger. There were a few other things, like when they agreed to be part of this experiment and they were driven to the place they had to live for a week and they had their luggage with them, they were dropped off there and they were told, okay, your room's on the 2nd floor, carry your luggage up to your bedroom. There were little old ladies saying, I can't physically carry this, and they were just left there, they had to do it. And then the third group were people who didn't go to a different house, but they reminisced about being 20 years younger quite strongly for that week. The people who actually lived differently for a week had significantly improved visual acuity and musculoskeletal coordination at the end of the week. Even the people who reminisced had some improvements, not as much as the group that lived. So you're getting to see the trend here. It's very similar. If you get 3 groups, one does nothing, one actually does something, and one thinks about doing something, there's 3 gradations of what happens in the body physically.
That is you just stop for a second. I get a chance to talk to a lot of interesting people, and you're right there in the category of interesting people. I get a chance to talk to a lot of interesting people, and there's not a lot of things that cause me to just kind of go, okay. I mean, I guess I could have done all kinds of searches before I met you and all that kind of stuff, but to hear that you can take a study where someone's doing the activity and someone's imagining the activity and actually get positive results on the quote imaginer is just mind-blowing. It causes you to kind of just go, okay, hold on. We really need to reassess almost everything from age 6 on up. And of course, the schooling system is terrible for putting a positive thought process in kids. That's a whole different story. But anyways, I don't want to keep rambling.
Well, I'm thrilled by your reaction. And it really comes back to how we started out, which is if you take that, then you say, well, what if you apply that to your relationships? What if you apply it to starting up your own business? What if you apply it to your own personal creativity or intuition or emotional intelligence? What can you do with that? That's where it starts to get super interesting. It becomes a bit more intangible, obviously, but if you take those principles and you apply them, and I've used examples from my own life, from my coaching clients who are senior executives, from my friends and family. Now I'm getting lots of feedback from people who have read the book, who've created vision boards, who've got engaged, who've got pregnant, who've sort of managed to overcome addictions. It's actually been mind-blowing for me, even though I really looked into the theory and I wrote it up and I extrapolated what this could mean for real people's lives. Every time I get a message like this, usually on Instagram, I read it out to my husband and I'm just like, can you believe this? Yeah, I'm torn. There's half of me that's, of course I can believe it because I understand the science behind it. And there's definitely that part of me that just thinks this is magic.
Yeah, it really makes me think about the word charisma some, because charisma is a word we often use, but when I think about it in the context of your work, charisma becomes something where that's the attraction. If you're genuinely showing charisma, it's almost impossible to not have the people around you attracted to you. It's literally impossible. And I'm not saying I've done this like on purpose. I just try to be in a general state like that most of the time. You can watch people who perhaps have had maybe a boring week or a boring month or a boring year or whatever. Perhaps they've been around a boring set of individuals for a period of time. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but if you enter their field of vision and you give them something, you give them that energy, you give them that attraction, it's like instantaneous to watch the change.
Absolutely. I mean, I call it abundance, but I actually really prefer your word. Again, I might steal that and start using it myself. I mean, there are different words for it. So I think as people are listening to this, they will resonate with what that means for them. But you know the difference between you on a good day and you on a bad day. And I often feel I don't have to say more than that. It's not about comparing yourself to anyone else. It's about what you can achieve when you're in flow, as you said, how you feel like you can conquer the world, all the traffic lights are green, everything goes right for you. We've all had days like that, but we feel like we can't make that day happen necessarily. It's great if it happens, but not every day is like that. What I'm saying is, given everything that we've discussed so far, there's more that you can do to make more days like that.
I've spent the last 7 years, a lot of that time, in generally a Buddhist country. And that, I don't have the evidence that you have. But I would say for me, spending that time in a Buddhist country, practicing pretty much hardcore yoga 2 to 3 times a week, something has happened in terms of my desire to want to keep getting that fix that I don't want to ever let go of it. I think anyone who's not had a chance to spend time in a Buddhist country is missing something. That's not a religious statement either. I'm not trying to be religious at all. I'm just saying there's something when you're around people that have kind of come up with that organizing system. It's different. It's different and it's attractive. It's nice. And to build on that thought of yoga, mentioning that I've been practicing for like 7 years. And the one thing I can still remember, the first couple months of doing yoga, okay, whatever. But then when I switched to doing it multiple times a week, then I started to get to that flow state. Then I started to get to that point where the mind lets go, you release, all that kind of stuff. That stuff's just all right here in the same headspace where you're at, because once you can let go of all those things, then you can kind of open up to the new things. If you sit around your life and you hold on to all this other stuff and you live in the past, my gosh, how can anyone make progress, for example, in the paths that you're going?
You've just said so much that I want to speak to. I'm probably not going to remember all of it.
I don't know what I said. It's a lot of stuff.
Some of it is stuff that I think people will struggle with. And this really comes back to the question of the criticism around The Secret. But when I can say things like this, and I only have research on women for yoga, but it'll be the same for different genders. Women who do yoga 3 times a week have lower levels of the stress hormone cortisol than age-matched women that don't. You've told us personal story, and you've talked about being on your journey, letting go of worrying about the past. That's where it starts to get a bit intangible for people. But this little bit of evidence that I've just given adds to your story and says, okay, so once you'd been doing it regularly enough, multiple times a week, your stress hormone levels went down. So physically, your body changed. Your neuroendocrine system, which connects up the glands in your body that release hormones, with your nervous system, which signals to your brain, includes your brain, obviously, but from your body, that changed. It's not just I felt able to let go of stuff I hadn't been able to let go of before. It's you physically changed your body, and that's had an effect on your mind. This is what I mean when I talk about the brain-body connection, that we all sort of know that if we're really tired or hungry, that it can affect how we feel mentally. But I don't think it's appreciated quite as much how if we're feeling super confident or we're feeling really stressed, the cascade effect that that has on our body, on our posture, on the eye contact that we make with people, on whether we smile or not. Like you said, sort of the vibe that we give out. And when I say vibe, I don't mean this intangible sort of feeling that people get, although there is such a thing as emotional contagion. I'm talking about the levels of stress hormone that signal to other people around us whether they should be stressed or not. Can I just do my second part? Because I will definitely forget if I don't.
No, jump in.
Talking about you living in a Buddhist country, I was brought up Hindu. For my entire childhood, pretty much until I went to university, I felt a terrible conflict and dilemma between the Ayurvedic practices and the yoga and meditation and incense and chanting that was going on at home, and the fact that I was going to school in central London with people that were not of that religion, in a country that's not mainly that religion. As a child, I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be like my friends. I wanted to do what they did. I didn't want to do strange things that nobody else was doing. It was really only when I started med school and I started specializing in the neuro topics that I started to see these things that my mother had told me about Ayurveda, like, for example, that turmeric is anti-inflammatory and it implicated positively in bowel cancer and dementia. Well, that I didn't really believe when I was a young child, that got proven around the time I was at med school, and many, many more examples like that. By the time it came to writing the book, which was many years later, many years later, I was at university so long ago, I was able for the first time to really bring those things together with integrity, without any feeling that there was a mismatch or I was misaligned. And I think that relates back to flow and what you were asking earlier about what does it look like on a brain scan when people are in a certain state. I believe two things. I believe that when we're aligned physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, whatever that means to you, and equally, I don't mean that as a religious statement either. When our brain, the logical pathways of the brain, the emotional pathways of the brain, and our gut, our intuition, our trust in ourselves, when those things are aligned, that's when the magic happens.
I'm sure there are people listening, and I've talked about yoga on this podcast before. I'm sure there's some people listening that say, okay, that's great, Mike. Tara, you've found your outlets. You've found your ways to get your mind to a certain place, and that works for you. Well, let me tell you what I do, Mike, Tara. I sit down with a nice bottle of scotch, and I get to the same place with my nice bottle of scotch. I want you to address two things. First, I don't think that's true. Number two, there's an opportunity cost. If you go to the bottle of scotch, it just keeps you away from getting to some of this mind-body understanding that we're talking about. Just delays it if you are going to go that direction in the end.
So there are a couple of things here. One is about inducing a chemical state of relaxation versus finding the path to being able to do that freely with your own toolkit that you have in your mind and your body. I was going to take quite a hard line on alcohol as a neurotoxin, and it might give you that temporary state of chemical feeling like you're relaxed, but actually it's not real. But then I was thinking about all the research that's coming out now on ayahuasca, for example, where the people I know who've tried it say that it truly accelerates that insight into self, spirit, whatever it is. So I could make the same argument and say, but you've taken a chemical that's put you into that state. Personally, I do flotation tank instead, which would probably take longer and doesn't give such massive insights, but apparently gets you to the same state as well. I never like to have too hard a line on anything. I actually still say alcohol in moderation, if that's your choice, is up to people. We're adults with agency. We can make our own choices. But there's just too much evidence that alcohol, even in small amounts, seriously disrupts your sleep and the cleansing process that's so necessary to removing toxins from your brain. That high levels of alcohol and stress actually kill neurons in the brain. That even psychologically, if you're not taking it to this level that we have more knowledge of now with the hard science, even psychologically, there's a reason that there's phrases like bottling it up, because usually the alcohol is to achieve that temporary state, to not face something that we need to look into psychologically or spiritually. I say that with no judgment, because for some people it purely is a social thing in moderation. I'd probably say in that case, why don't you try both? Why don't you try some meditation? If you do like that glass of wine or that serving of scotch, then I'm not here to tell people that they shouldn't do that. I agree with you. It's not true that it gets you to that same state.
Exactly. I'm more interested in the science here because, look, everything's in moderation. Everyone gets a chance to make their own choices. But I think, and I've had other experts on this show talk about what an ounce of alcohol does to REM sleep. It basically destroys it. I think from a science perspective, it's coming in loudly and clearly. For example, if we want to go down this path of the law of attraction, if we want to have better positive directions with our mind, it's best to keep it in a certain clean state is one way to think about it.
I think there's actually a quote from the Buddha that says it's our responsibility to keep our body in a clean state because otherwise we can't keep our mind in a clean state. So the science that would back that up is that sleep is extremely restorative. It's a physical and psychological process of working through what we've been exposed to that day, that week. Of course, if you're tired because you haven't slept well, or if your resilience is really reducing over time because you regularly don't sleep well, then it's much harder to not be tempted by that junk food instead of eating healthily. It's much harder to give in to pressure from somebody to do something that's really not good for you. It's much harder to use your willpower. Also, I think you'll be fascinated, given the kind of things that you've responded to in our chat, by the information on the glymphatic system, which is the cleansing system of the brain. It's made up from the words lymphatic, which is the cleansing system of the body, and glial cells, which are cells in the brain. And this system, this research came out in about 2012, showing that there's a very active process of forcibly flushing out toxins overnight, which takes 7 to 8 hours, which is why we need to be asleep for 7 to 9 hours or in bed for 7 to 9 hours to allow the full process to occur. The exact pathology of dementing diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, the plaques and tangles, the tau proteins, amyloid buildup, that's what gets flushed out. If that process is regularly disrupted, it leads to a buildup of those toxins, and it's now been causally correlated to earlier showing of symptoms related to dementia. When the research first came out in 2012, they said there's a correlation between disrupting this cleansing process overnight and higher levels of dementia, but they couldn't say that it was caused by it. Over time, the research has shown that it's causal. When we don't take care of our sleep, when we have alcohol on too many nights, and it disrupts that process because our body then is busy metabolizing the alcohol instead of cleaning out the brain, we are causing serious consequences for ourselves in future.
Let me take you back in time a little bit. This was something that I was not aware of, but the law of attraction for some authors, some researchers, this goes back in time to something called the master key system. 1916. I wasn't around in 1916. You weren't around in 1916. This was like what? A few years before World War I? I mean, this is a pretty different time and place. Who were these people? What was the master key system? What were they figuring out?
I just got goosebumps hearing you say that, because this was the book that changed my life. It's by a guy called Charles Haanel. It was originally published, I think it was weekly, it may have been monthly, but it's separate sort of chapters that build on each other. And it's a little bit of theory followed by an exercise that you have to perfect each week or each month. I had read this book already, but not done the exercises. So I was traveling around the world with my ex-husband. I was about 30. And I read the book because it was strongly recommended by a friend. And I thought, oh, if I ever need to, I'll come back to these exercises. Well, fast forward 5 years, I've just got divorced. I need these exercises. So I go back to the book. It's actually not even for sale anymore. I got it on Amazon Marketplace. It's not published anymore. You can get it on Kindle. It took me 6 months. I worked through all of these exercises. And that was what really started me on this journey of I changed the way that I think, and it actually changed my life. And that made me want to look into the science, because the book is amazing, but it does have religious connotations. It is borderline judgmental is the tone of it, I would say. And I wanted to write something that was non-judgmental, that wasn't religious, that was very encompassing for all sorts of different types of people, and that was backed up by science. That was really important to me. I did everything in that book more because I have a Hindu background than because it satisfied the scientific part of me. Then it had this amazing effect. I thought if I could write a modern, scientific, secular, non-judgmental version of this book, that would be amazing.
Is the most important thing you would take out of this book the law of attraction?
It's a little bit different to The Secret and how it talks about it. It talks more about the way that you think determines what happens in your life. So if you want to call that the law of attraction, then yes.
Well, go ahead and give me the summary of the 1916 work. What would be, I'm going to go find it after I get off the call with you, but what's the grand insight? What was, I mean, you say this changed your life, and I'm curious, how did you find out about it? Also, you can tell me that, but what was the core part, the sentence or the paragraph that said, Miss, this is the way you're going?
It was just a really old school friend that recommended it, that said, I've read it, Dad's read it, you've got to read it. Like I said, it was a time of my life. Things were going well, so I didn't feel compelled to act on it, but I did read it. I could have sort of stored it in my brain for future use. I would say the one word that describes what this book gives you is manifestation. I have written about manifestation in the book, but I've also written a particular where I've distilled the 12 laws of attraction. I've called one of them magnetic desire. You can't just shortcut to this statement that I'm going to give you. You have to actually do all the exercises, because otherwise it's not magnetic enough, if you like. It basically says, convince yourself of the truth that you wish to manifest. How I've interpreted this in my book is that you create a vision board, which is a collage made by hand with metaphorical representations of what you want in your life. Like I said, it's an action board, so you also make sure that you're doing things to progress that as much as you can. The third part of it that's very much inspired by the Master Key system is that you visualize all of those things being true. This relates back to the people in their 80s who visualized being 60. It relates back to the people who visualize lifting weights. It relates back to the person in the coma that thinks about playing tennis. The impact that that has on your brain primes your brain to grasp opportunities that might otherwise have passed you by. Because we're bombarded with so much information, so much data all day long, everything we smell, everything we see, every person we meet, every emotion we experience, the brain has this amazing natural filtering system. The brain is more focused on what we need to do to survive today. The long-term goals are lower down on the priority list, but by priming our brain with the vision board and then the actions and the conviction that it's true, we're more likely to notice things that we may not have noticed because we're busy with the day job. We're busy trying to put food on the table. We're busy trying to just keep our relationship going and keep our head above water. These techniques allow your brain to change what it's looking out for whilst you still do the day job and live your life.
The reason that I'm talking to you right now is because I put this podcast up in 2012. And in the summer of 2012, having done the podcast for like 6 months, talking mostly about investments, I started talking about yoga. And an associate who I did not know then invited me to come speak in Tokyo. I'd done that before, so no big deal. But the speaking engagement then expanded to a 4-month speaking engagement across Asia. And then I was kind of like, well, I'm hooked on Asia and didn't really want to leave. And I think that's, again, not a toot my horn example, but it's kind of being open to the moment. It's saying, okay, I can keep doing what I'm doing. I can keep going through these motions, but then something unexpected happens. Maybe to some degree, I was imagining and pushing once this opportunity started to appear. But I think a lot of people don't want to do that. They don't want to kind of be so open. And I think that's what a lot of our conversation is about today, which is if you've got that plastic mind, that agile mind, that's what so much of this law of attraction is all about. If you've already convinced yourself it's impossible, guess what? It's impossible.
Exactly. You took a risk because that may not have worked out as well as it obviously has, or it may have worked out differently on so many levels.
But that's life.
Well, it is, but it's much easier for people to stay in the comfort zone. That's why many people would not have done what you did. It's very easy to convince yourself that investment is where it's at. That's what I know about. That's what people are listening to. I should just keep doing the same thing. And that's what I call autopilot living. Just never stepping back and challenging what you're doing and thinking, should I be doing something different? Or when a slightly left field opportunity like this comes up, the default for people on autopilot is, well, no, that's not in the plan. I can't go to Asia.
Trust me, I'm looking at your bio. I do not have the educational background. I mean, I've got the basics, the BA, the MBA, and all that kind of stuff. But I think it sometimes shows that regardless of what one thinks their limits or constraints are, they're really not there.
They're only there if you think they are, right? Yeah, I mean, I'm just a bit speechless because I'm just loving this conversation.
You didn't know you were getting on the phone with some whack job secret attraction guy already, huh?
No, I took a risk.
The publisher's like, oh, talk to this guy. Maybe it'll be normal. Who knows? Maybe something like that.
My comfort zone of working with investment professionals. It's not what I was expecting.
Hey, I have a question though. Stoicism. Where does this fit into the landscape? Because I've had an author on this podcast, Ryan Holiday, many times. He has many best-selling books going down the Stoic path. And I've heard some people describe Stoics as kind of like angry Buddhists. I think a lot of the thinking and thought process seems right there in the same headspace of where you've gone.
Yeah, I know Ryan. I really, really like him and his work. He actually asked me to write something for the Daily Stoic around the time of the book launch, for the US book launch in October. I had to pick some favorite quotes, and I just could not believe, given that I am so strong on the neuroscience, which is relatively new because scanning has only been around 20, 25 years, sophisticated scanning. They were basically saying so long ago, we're already saying the things that I think we can say now because of brain scanning. I literally couldn't believe it.
How did they figure it out?
It's a philosophy, isn't it? Maybe now, because of everything that's going on in the world, we're hungry for more evidence to back it up because we don't have time to try everything. A lot of people are moving away from blind faith. I think they figured it out in the same way that you're living in a Buddhist country, that philosophy, it's by contemplation. It's by stepping back and observing your emotions and seeing what they do to you. I mean, I was even going to say, one of the things I wanted to say, and we're obviously just going off in this amazing conversation, was that when your brain is in abundance, it biases your decision making to a healthier risk appetite. And that's probably what happened to you when you took this opportunity to move to Asia. If you were really stressed and in a sort of lack or scarcity mindset, I don't think you would have moved.
It's probably true.
I was just going to say that if you had the time and the insight to study that in yourself and other people, you would come to the same conclusions that these ancient philosophers have, these religious beliefs have, and that the science is now pointing to as well.
It is so cool. You know, I'm looking here at my note. I have my extensive 1 pages of note. No, actually 1 page. I make 1 page of notes for everybody. That's my process. Because otherwise, then I go do some interviews and people are going to be like, here's question number 2, Tara. Now question number 3 is coming next. I don't really have any questions. But I'm looking at this word, this 2-word combination, whole brain. And I love the pieces of this, the emotional intelligence. I can think of Daniel Goleman's book, the physicality, the guts and intuition, the motivation, the logic, making good decisions, creativity, designing the future of an ideal life. This is what you call the source. This is your source, right?
Yeah, the source is to do with brain agility, which is different ways of thinking, but it's the integrative power of putting all of those different ways of thinking together. You may be strongly logical and quite intuitive. I may be very empathic and intuitive. We each have many more ways of thinking that we can access. And I came up with an analogy recently, which is that if I asked you to build a brick wall outside your house, think about how long it would take if you did it by yourself. And then think about how long it would take and how easy it would be if you asked 4 or 5 friends to help you. That's exactly what it is with these 6 ways of thinking. It's like saying, I have a preferred way of thinking, and that pathway is really strongly built up in my brain because that's how it works. Something that you like doing, that you do often, that pathway becomes stronger in your brain. But I'm going to recruit these other pathways, which may not be as strong, but they exist in all of our brains. So I'm going to get the whole decision made or the job done much more holistically. And by holistic, I mean whole brain, because I'm including thinking outside of the box. I'm including what motivates me and what doesn't. I'm including like making the best possible decision because I'm in an abundant brain state. I'm listening to my body. I'm accessing my inner wisdom. I'm taking into account what's going on emotionally. I'm not ignoring that.
If you have to, taking all of your experience, your education, your associates, the conversations, the decades of work, and you look at the trend line of the insights that we're gathering right now across the globe with so many scientists and researchers and doctors working together, where do you think we will find our understanding? And I don't know the exact number to throw out at you. I was thinking, where would we find our understanding in 25 years, 50 years, 75 years? Will it literally be to a point where, obviously this is a guess and I'm not holding you to it, but will it be to a point where the way we teach and the way that we explain life to people will change? Or is there something at the end of the rainbow that you can imagine where this really gets codified as like, hey, hold on, this is how it all works, so to speak?
The answer to that question is complex because of how much the world is going to change in the next 5, 10, 25, 50 years. And the biggest factor in that is AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning, because that's going to change the way that we have to be. Machines can make decisions millions, if not billions of times faster than us. So that logical aspect around decision making is going to become less important for us because that will be outsourced. Things like empathy, intuition, and creativity will become much more important. And actually, this is going to sound really strange because it doesn't really go together with it, but the gut microbiome is going to become much more important. So that's a very exciting emerging field. We've known for a long time, actually, that there's a direct connection between the gut neurons and the brain, but there's now a third sort of direction of communication with the gut bacteria, which separately signal to the gut neurons and to the brain directly. I'm going to put this together. This might sound crazy, but it makes sense in my head, is that we're going to understand more about how our gut bacteria connect to our immunity and our resilience in our brain. We are going to outsource anything that can be automated, like the more logical tasks. So we're going to need to build up our intuition, which is related to the state of our gut, our creativity, and our empathy. I believe that we'll be human AI hybrids anyway. Yes, we'll codify the human bits that we can do better, but I think that the other bits will be replaced by AI. So that's the future that we're looking at.
Do you have a date on the AI transition, with people love to call the singularity? Do you allow yourself to give a range of numbers of when you can imagine such time?
You said you weren't going to pin me down on numbers.
I said range. Mike, in the next 1,000 years? I don't.
No, much quicker than that. The research that I'm looking at for teams where people will be managing mixed human and robot teams is 5 years. And if you think about the fact that we have pacemakers, we have internal defibrillators, we have brain implants for epilepsy, we have amazing prosthetic limbs, it's really not that far away. I mean, Black Mirror is my favorite show.
I just binged watched it for the first time recently.
Did you? Well, I actually say to people, you must watch it because it's preparing us for the future.
The Star Trek episode was quite amazing.
Yeah, I mean, all of them are amazing. I've seen all of them. And I've even played the interactive one. Like, I was the first person. I was like, I need the remote control that works for this so that I can play the interactive show. I genuinely believe that it educates the public about what to expect in the future because it's the not too distant future. I don't know if you remember the one about where people get rated on their interaction with each other.
Yes, the young lady going to the wedding and whatnot. Yes.
Yes. And if you think about how Instagram likes have become and what's going on with that, you can see that it's not that far away. And the thing where you get blocked from the community and no one can see you and you can't interact with anyone, that's something that you can imagine. You can already do that on your phone. You can't do it in real life, but this person was blocked from society. Yeah, I think watching sci-fi is actually really healthy for people to understand what's going to happen in the future. I think that working on your own empathy, intuition, and creativity is the best way to future-proof yourself for the likely changes that we'll experience.
Before I ask you where we can send people, I have one follow-up question. I had a guest on this show a few years back. He had a book talking about the, quote, singularity and how he thought it would unfold first. He did not think it would be artificial intelligence in the way that people imagine, like a robot or whatnot. He thought what we would get to first is the ability to port Tara's mind to a hard drive, the consciousness to go onto a hard drive, and then those consciousness would be replicated and become a workforce and all that other kind of fun stuff. How do you see that, given that you're so in this headspace, the point in time where that, I don't want to pin you down the date, but just you could talk about the idea of taking your mind and porting it to a drive. To me, that just seems, that's where you live forever, because once you port the mind to a drive and you live in virtual reality, it goes on forever, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's been some movies about this kind of thing already. So Transcendence with Johnny Depp, it went a bit weird at the end, but it started off with that idea. And then Chappie, the robot, he was a robot, but in the end, somebody who died, their mind was put into another robot. So I always think that when something's already in a movie, then it is literally a number of 5, 10, 20, 25 years till it's a real thing. I mean, because it represents immortality, there's actually a lot of research going on in that area. So I agree, that's absolutely going to be a thing. The only problem at the moment is creating AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, which is a brain that's actually big enough to take on the full sort of nuanced sophistication of a human brain. And there are companies like OpenAI and Neuralink that are working on that. Yeah, again, much shorter time than we would probably like to think. Like I said, I love working with the elderly. And so I've done a lot of research into robot carers and robot pets for the elderly. The idea of uploading your consciousness, which does seem a bit wild and scary to us now, I think is less wild and scary if you're 98 and you're facing death.
Someone else might have the wild and scary part going, I don't. I'm ready to go. Beam me up. The book, the source, the secrets of the universe, the science of the brain. Is there a website we can send people to, Tara?
It's just my website, taraswart.com. It's got information about the book, and you can sign up to the newsletter, which is called Resource. I'm very active on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So Tara Swart.
If they can't find you, as I say to many guests, when they worry about giving out too much information that people might not be able to find them, if they can't find you, that's a good filter. They were not meant to find you. If they can listen to this whole conversation and they still can't use Google, please, I don't even want you to listen to my podcast. It's too much drama for me. I don't want it. It's too much stress.
I'm not going to say I don't want you to read my book, because I do want them to read my book. But seriously, I'm so all over Google, it's actually a bit embarrassing. So I don't think that anybody would not be able to find me either under Tara Swart or Dr. Tara Swart. So yeah, let's leave it to the universe and the law of attraction.
There you go. Hey, Tara, thank you for coming on. This is your first book?
It's my first book by myself. I have co-written 2 other books.
Well, I'm sure there'll be another one by yourself. That's how this game works, because you can't stop once you get started. So keep me posted on future stuff.
I will. We'll see. Thank you so much, Michael.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.